Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 555. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We have a lot of news to cover on today's show. I was filling in for Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com over the weekend, so I did quite a bit of writing. So I'm going to try to get through everything I wrote over the weekend, plus some stuff from, friends of the show, Jason Ditz, Will Porter, and Connor Freeman has a couple great articles out, but he'll be on later in the week to talk about them. And just a reminder to everyone, share the show if you can. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We post the show on the blog at antiwar.com. It's up at YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee if you like watching the video version of the show. And of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. And yeah, thank you all so much for all the support that you give the show. Let's get into the news today. All right, first up here, White House calls on Haitian leader to resign, considers sending elite soldiers to embassy. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken held a series of conversations with Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry, pressuring him to resign. Henry rose to power with the Biden administration's support after the former leader was assassinated in 2021. As prime minister, Henry has lost control over most of the capital city to opposition groups and criminal gangs. The Miami Herald reports Blinken pressed Haiti's Prime Minister Ariel Henry to announce his resignation and a political transition in a series of phone calls that took place on Thursday and were described as tense. After President Jovenel Moïse was assassinated in July of 2021, the White House worked to push Henry into power. Under his term in office, the Haitian government has increasingly lost control over Port-au-Prince. The Biden administration attempted to prop up the Henry government by establishing an armed international force to deploy to Haiti with UN Security Council approval. In October, the body approved the U.S. plan for Kenya to lead an armed international police force in Haiti. However, the White House's plan has faced considerable opposition in Haiti and in Kenya. The Kenyan opposition leader, President William Ruto, was sued at the country's high court to block the proposal. In January, the court in Nairobi ruled in favor of the opposition, blocking the deployment. Last week, Ruto and Henry inked an agreement paving the way for the Kenyan-led armed deployment to move forward. While Henry was in Kenya signing the agreement, opposition groups in Port-au-Prince carried out a series of attacks on prisons and the main airport. After leaving to meet with international partners and ink the agreement with Ruto, Henry has been unable to return to Haiti. And I wrote this article on Friday, and that does remain true as of today, Monday, March 11th. Here, he is still unable to enter the country. He tried to land in the Dominican Republic, which of course the country that shares the island with Haiti, wasn't able to enter that way. I think he's hanging out in Puerto Rico right now. A lot of people are speculating, and I do think this is correct. By the end of the week, he will have retired to a nice home in southern Florida somewhere, like so many other of the American-supported coup leaders in this region of the world, including the probably the most recent addition to the club is Juan Guaido from Venezuela. So, in response to all this, the White House was considering sending an elite Marine unit to the embassy, but that elite Marine unit is now there. And the State Department had described the situation in Haiti as untenable. And yesterday on Sunday, they went ahead and withdrew the non-essential embassy staff. So, this is something that does happen whenever there's just a lot of hostilities in countries. The U.S. will withdraw their non-essential embassy staff. So this isn't a huge deal, but given everything going on, again, I think it's pretty likely we see the official end of the Henry government this week. My hope is that, and just, as far as violence in Haiti, I think it would be far better if he just decided to retire rather than trying to return to Port-au-Prince, where it seems like his presence is going to provoke a larger amount of bloodshed than is already being committed. Now, one more thing I want to say here is a lot of people like to say, oh, it's the Haitian government versus gangs, right? Like, these are basically drug dealers who have kind of turned themselves into like mayors of their own little sections of Port-au-Prince, and it's the government as kind of the two opposition forces. But that's really incorrect. There are a lot of different groups, and when we were talking about Syria in 2012, 2013, and there's all these different, jihadist groups popping up. I guess we could have referred to them as gangs, but that I don't think that would have really accurately described it or put the right image in people's minds. Because, some of these people who are dismissed as gang leaders, like this barbecue guy, who I'm sure, being the head of a armed organization in Haiti, he has probably done many things that are legitimate and very serious crimes, and has ordered those things be committed as well. But so is every other government in the world, and he is like building schools. So it's not just like his whole empire is built on running drugs and things like that I think people think of when they say, oh, it's these gangs running in the streets of Haiti. And there's also other armed forces that are far more, it seem to be more like paramilitary groups to me, than something I would call just a gang. Again, I think it gives the wrong impression to American readers about what's going on there in Haiti. All right, the next article here, this is actually an op-ed from antiwar.com, but it's got a lot of news in it, and it's from Ted Snyder. And of course, I am the opinion editor at antiwar.com, so I thought this was a really great piece, and I'm glad that we also ran in the news section at antiwar.com last week. And so I just want to kind of mention what Ted says in this article here, because I think it's really important. Ted writes, on June 13th, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia and Ukraine had reached an agreement in Istanbul, that agreement had been initialed by both sides. On June 17th, Putin held up that draft agreement and showed it to a delegation of African leaders. Representatives from each side of the negotiations have confirmed that the peace was within reach, and even that the draft agreement had been arrived at. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov backed Putin's account, saying that we did hold talks in March and April of 22. We agreed on certain things. Everything was already initialed. But this was not just the Russian tale. Former advisor to the office of the president of Ukraine, who was a member of the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul, says the negotiations were successful. A second member of the Ukrainian negotiating team, the former deputy minister of foreign affairs, also reported that they concluded the so-called Istanbul communique and were very close in the middle of April, in the end of April, to finalize our war with a peace settlement. Intermediaries in the talks, from the Turkish foreign minister to the deputy chairman of Turkey's governing party, to then Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and the former German Chancellor, have all offered their firsthand testimonies on support of the story. But despite this overwhelming evidence offered by witnesses, detractors have argued that the peace was nowhere close, some employing the long discredited method of knowing that Putin's mind, to have argued that the Russian president really never intended to agree to this. But on March 1st, so over a week ago now, the Wall Street Journal revealed that the draft peace treaty did exist. The draft that Putin held up for his audience was not a deception. The Wall Street Journal reports that they and others familiar with the negotiations have viewed it, and the draft agreement they viewed bears very strong resemblance to the one that Putin and the delegates to the talks claimed. And so this is, I think, very significant. Now, we've already had also Fiona Hill, people within the DC blob and establishment confirm this, but, now this is in the Wall Street Journal. And so anybody who says it's a lie, you could say, well, the Wall Street Journal reported it. And the real reason this is so important, of course, is we didn't have to do any of this. There was a deal in place in March and April that could have allowed this war to come to an end. And the Biden administration, along with their partners in the UK, pushed the Ukrainians to go fight a war that's resulted in 500,000 of them being killed or injured at this point. It's absolutely horrific what's happened to Ukraine, and it could have been prevented. The U.S. has a lot of leverage on Russia, and if we really wanted to, we could, take some of that leverage, some of the ways that we've either punished Russia or built up our military in Eastern Europe, and offer to roll that back as, things that the West can concede here to give Ukraine a better deal now to end the war in Ukraine. All right, this from Dave DeCamp, March 6th, antiwar.com. Russian forces made steady gains in eastern Ukraine. This is more or less what was predicted, that after the fall of Avdiivka, which fell last month, that this was pretty central to the Ukrainian front lines in the region. And so they didn't have well fortified positions nearby. And I guess the way the terrain permits them to fortify defenses and stuff like that, it was pretty difficult. And so, this was expected. So Dave writes, according to the Russian Defense Ministry estimates, it took Russian troops 4 months to advance 5.6 miles through Donetsk before taking Avdiivka. In the last 3 weeks, Russian forces have already advanced 3 miles west of the city. Russia was expected to be able to start gaining territory more rapidly once Avdiivka was taken, if it could keep up the momentum. Ukrainian soldiers on the front are facing severe manpower and weapons shortages, but Ukrainian leadership says the fight will continue. Now, a couple of reasons I think why the steady gains are being made. This is a city that was held by Ukraine since 2014, so they had some pretty well fortified defenses there. They have been working on them for a decade, and so this was a pretty big victory for the Russians here. But rather than realizing the city was going to fall, similar to Bakhmut, the Ukrainians kept pouring more and more resources into the city. And so when their lines finally broke and the city fell, they had thousands of troops captured, I'm sure hundreds or if not more killed, and they didn't have well entrenched defensive lines behind, because they're piling the resources into keeping the city, not building up defenses behind the city. And so this has created this problem for the Ukrainians, where they're now losing more territory. Not sure where the bleeding will stop, how far the Russians will be able to advance here, but it seems like they're going to take quite a bit of ground here in Donetsk. All right. This one is from CNN. I found it pretty interesting. New Russian bomb devastating Ukrainian front lines. And so whenever you have a story like this in a mainstream outlet, you always have to be a little bit skeptical that what's going on here is that this is really a pitch for more defense weapons. But they got some statements from Ukrainian soldiers here that do not sound good. So I think this might just be some honest reporting. So CNN talked to one member from Ukraine's 46th Separate Air Mobile Brigade, and they said, previously we were only shelled with artillery. Now the Russians have taken on more aggressively and started using Air Force assets, particularly the FAB 1500. Why are they using the FAB 1500? Because the damage done by it is very serious. If you survive, you're guaranteed a contusion. It puts a lot of pressure on soldiers' morale. Not all of our guys can withstand it. While they are more or less used to the FAB 500, now the FAB 1500 is hell. This is kind of what I have put together from what CNN reported. The FAB 1500 seems to be comparable to an American JDAM kit that upgrades an unguided bomb to one equipped with GPS guidance. According to the Ukrainian Air Force spokesman, our air defenses are getting stronger, but we still don't have enough. Their goal is not only to hit our frontline positions, but guidance bombs are also flying further behind our defenders to hit near command posts, rear supplies, ammunition, and so on. The attack aviation Su-35 and Su-34 bombers don't approach as close as they would like to. And so this is the problem for the Ukrainians at this point. The Russians have developed more military technology and just have more military supplies to do so. And, they're short on weapons and supplies. Now, the West is kind of desperate to try to cover the Ukrainian weapons shortages. And this seems to be part of the UK's, they're running out of air defenses to send Ukraine. They're not able to send them more artillery. And so they're going to send Ukraine 10,000 UAVs. It seems that these will almost all be small drones. We're not talking about Reapers. We're talking about things that are 1, 2, maybe 3 feet, circumference, and some of them are one-way attack drones. So UK Defense Secretary Grant Shapes announced the transfer following a meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky on Thursday, saying, "I'm ramping up our commitment to arm Ukraine with cutting-edge new drones coming directly from the UK's world-leading defense industries, straight from the factory floor to the front line." Sky News reports that the latest supply is made up of mostly first-person view, FPV view, as well as 1,000 one-way attack drones, surveillance, and maritime drones. The drones will cost London $160 million, while Shapes pledged another $150 million in military support. Ukrainian soldiers have increasingly relied on one-way attack drones or kamikaze drones, as Western backers have failed to produce enough artillery rounds to meet Ukraine's needs. While small drones have proven effective in some situations, their small payloads make them ineffective against armor and reinforced structures. Additionally, Ukrainian officers have explained to Western media outlets that they lack the manpower to conduct military operations. Officers report that the new soldiers they get are undertrained. Shapes attempted to downplay this, saying Kiev needed weapons, not more men. On my third visit to this great country, I was pleased to be able to offer my firm reassurance to President Zelensky on the UK's unwavering commitment to the brave people and military forces of Ukraine. For now, what we need is equipment. What they need is for more countries to step up, as the United Kingdom has done from the outset. Leaders in Washington, London, and across the alliance have repeatedly pledged to give Ukraine everything it needs to win the war. However, more than 2 years into the conflict, public support, Western arms depots, and funding for Kiev have largely dried up in the West, and Ukraine's in some serious trouble here. All right, so remember the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, that's General Zaluzhny. He was forced out of his job by President Zelensky and has been given a pretty interesting new post. He's going to be sent to be the ambassador of the UK. So this is, I think, maybe a bad move on the part of Zelensky here, sending your political opposition to the capital of one of your main backers could be very dangerous. If things start going well for Zelensky, Zaluzhny could start saying to everybody in London, and certainly that would probably give him a pretty big English-speaking audience, including a lot of Americans, that, this wouldn't be happening if I were in charge. And, just kind of really placing all the blame at the top and suggesting that, hey, I'm actually more popular than Zelensky, so maybe we just need a little change in leadership here. I think this is a very dangerous and very foolish move for Zelensky. All right, next up here, this one from Will Porter. French defense chief won't rule out Ukraine deployment. France's defense minister said Paris is still exploring its options for military presence in Ukraine, but stressed that troops would not have a direct combat role. The comments came after French opposition leaders warned that President Macron is planning to step up the country's involvement in the war. Speaking to local broadcaster on Friday, the defense minister explained that while Macron did not intend to become a co-belligerent in the conflict, France could still deploy forces to perform other tasks in Ukraine. He said, between the transfer of arms and co-belligerents, in other words, direct war with Russia, have we done everything within that space? Are there more paths that we could explore, and notably paths involving military presence? He suggested French soldiers could assist with mine clearance or training troops on the ground on Ukrainian soil. The more Ukraine needs to conscript to raise up its army, the greater the need will be for ramping up training, the minister continued, also knowing that 3 French military contractors would soon begin producing weapons inside the country. The defense minister's remarks followed the meeting between President Macron and the French party leaders one day prior, after which, on multiple occasions, figures sounded the alarm about direct military intervention in Ukraine. According to the National Secretary of the French Communist Party, that's Fabien Roussel, during a meeting with Macron, outlined a scenario of which could initiate an intervention and proposed a troop deployment that should Russian forces advance towards Odessa or towards Kiev. He did not say whether they would be involved in combat. Speaking after the meeting, National Rally leader Jordan Bardella warned about Macron had no limits and no red lines, and while La French coordinator said he arrived worried and left more worried. So just a lot of statements from French politicians saying they're worried that Macron is going to drag them deeper into this conflict. I also have something similar from a Polish official. So this is the Polish foreign minister who said, soldiers from NATO countries are already in Ukraine. I would like to thank the countries that are taking this risk, who they know who they are. The foreign minister said, commenting about Macron's statements about a potential deployment of French troops to Ukraine. He also said, unlike other European politicians, I will not say what countries these soldiers are from. I guess that's referred to the lead conversation of the German officials discussing that UK soldiers were the ones in Ukraine. All right, next up here, Sweden officially joins NATO, ending centuries of neutrality. So this is, I didn't think they were going to officially join until they had the big NATO get together this summer, but I guess they just went ahead and made official after the Hungarians were the last country to approve NATO membership for Sweden. So now the alliance has 32 members. One point I want to make here, and this is something that Dub Bondow always explains very well, and the U.S. has kind of developed this mentality that you want to collect allies like you collect Facebook friends, and this how somehow makes you stronger and better to have more allies and a deeper alliance, when in reality it actually makes the alliance a lot weaker, right? So if you need consensus to do something in the alliance, the more members you add, the more likely you're not going to be able to reach a consensus on anything, and eventually the body just becomes meaningless. The other option is, of course, if it's so expansive, all these different countries have all these different interests, somebody is eventually going to get you into a war. All right, next up here, some stories on Gaza. This one I wrote for antiwar.com on March 8th. Airdropped aid crushes 5 Palestinians to death in Gaza. And it's one of these things where this war has just become so cartoonishly evil and horrific for the Palestinians. So I write, the parachutes of airdropped aid pallets failed, causing a large object to plummet to the ground in northern Gaza, killing 5. The U.S. and several other countries have dropped a token amount of aid onto northern Gaza because Israel is only allowing a trickle of aid to enter the strip by land. A witness speaking with Al Jazeera explained the botched airdrop caused a building to collapse, killing some people who were sheltering inside. The witness said people were waiting for the drops when they noticed they were coming in fast. A group of people took cover in a construction site. One of the packages fell atop the site, causing it to collapse, killing and wounding people inside. I rushed to help the people inside when I realized my cousin was among them. He is now dead. Palestinian health officials and eyewitnesses who spoke with CBS News said that the air crate killed 5 people, including 2 children, on Friday morning in northern Gaza. Multiple videos have also shown pallets of aid that have fallen into the Mediterranean Sea while floating to the surface and appearing to tangle and plummet down. Aid groups have criticized the airdropped aid into Gaza as insufficient. The head of the Norwegian Refugee Council and humanitarian group, Jan Engeland, explained earlier this week that airdrops are expensive, haphazardous, and usually lead to the wrong people getting the aid. Gaza-based journalist Abdel Kadar al-Sabah told CNN that the airdrops of aid are useless and are causing more chaos. He said, "You are lucky if you even get a hold of these meals. I don't even bother to go searching for these aid parcels as people are always fighting over them." Palestinians say they want Biden to stop sending Israel bombs, not sending them more aid. Hassan Masala, a Palestinian in Khan Yunis, described his feelings as he dug through rubble caused by an Israeli airstrike. He said, "All these American weapons are killing our kids and killing us wherever we go. We don't need aid from them. We need them to stop the killing, stop the death." A Palestinian discussing the aid shipments on social media lamented that the nutrition information and instructions were not in English without Arabic translations. And this particular person was complaining, that he wasn't sure if the meals were halal. And I saw a lot of people, kind of taking these people to task and saying that, oh, if you were really starving, you wouldn't care what was in your food. But I think if you just look at how humans are, a lot of times I think when things get worse, people get more devout and more into the religion. And so when you're on absolute the desperate need, and you essentially need a miracle, right? That a miracle isn't a pallet of food floating down somewhere, maybe nearby, that's going to be fought over. Maybe it ends up in Israeli territory. Maybe the Israelis shoot you as you're going to look for it or something like that. A miracle would be the end of this conflict. And so, there's that. And also, there are more important things that, some people may have allergies or food sensitivity, stuff like that. Again, probably not your top concern whenever you're starving to death. However, if, your child is on the brink of death, an allergic reaction that, may otherwise be not that serious, or, require hospitalization or something, and there's no hospitals. So, nutrition labels are probably important for a select population in Gaza. And it just goes to show how haphazardous all this is, and kind of how pathetic this attempt is to airdrop aid into Gaza. So it is unclear what country is responsible for the botched aid drop. The U.S., Jordan, Egypt, France, and the Netherlands and Belgium have all coordinated with Israel to drop aid in the Strip. A lot of times I think these aid drops are coordinated by multiple countries. And so it's a U.S. plane and it's Jordanian food. It's a U.S. plane and it's Egyptian funded food, things like this. Maybe a Jordanian plane. I know they've dropped some aid, and maybe food funded from the Netherlands. These kinds of things are going on. In addition to the deadly aid drop on Friday morning, some aid shipments have floated far into the Mediterranean Sea, and others have landed in areas controlled by the Israeli military. And from just kind of going through on social media and seeing what the Palestinians who are in northern Gaza and still able to communicate are saying, it seems that a pretty significant number of these airdrops are kind of in unaccessible places, either places that people are concerned about going because it's too far away and they're worried about getting shot by the Israeli military on their way there, or places that are controlled by the Israeli military or too far out into the sea. All right, so a Rafah-based journalist explained there was a growing sense in Gaza that even aid is becoming more deadly. He said, "This is a tragedy people are experiencing in northern Gaza. Not only that they are confronted with the lack of food and medical supplies, but as they wait for packages of food, they are either targeted by the Israeli military or killed by a non-functional parachute. Last week, the Israeli military opened fire on Palestinians near an aid shipment, killing over 100 and injuring about 700. After October 7th, the Israeli Defense Minister Wont ordered a complete siege of the Strip. He said, "I have ordered a complete siege of the Strip. There will be no electricity, no fuel, no food, no fuel. Everything is now closed." President Joe Biden has claimed that he used American leverage over Israel to get Tel Aviv to allow more aid into the Strip. However, over the past 5 months, Tel Aviv has reduced aid shipments in Gaza from over 500 a day to under 100 a day. Those are trucks entering the Strip each day. As Israeli military operations have decimated Gaza and killed over 30,000 people, an increasing number of the 2.3 million Palestinians in the Strip have become dependent on international aid to survive. A report released by Refugees International on Thursday described the situation in Gaza as apocalyptic. Our research makes clear that the conditions inside Gaza are apocalyptic. The report said after 5 months of war, Palestinians are struggling to find adequate food, water, shelter, and basic medicine. Famine-level hunger is already widespread and worsening. At least 20 people in Gaza have starved to death because of the Israeli blockade of aid. Still, President Biden has refused to use Washington's significant leverage over Tel Aviv to get Israel to allow more aid into the Strip. All right, next up here, while we're talking about aid, UN alleges Israel tortured staff to generate Hamas intel. So I wrote this one for the Institute on March 9th. At least some of the evidence Israel used to allege ties between the UN Palestinian Aid Agency, that's UNRWA, and Hamas was obtained through torture of the organization's staff members, according to a report by the United Nations. After Israel After the Israelis made the allegations, the U.S. cut funding to UNRWA. Secretary of State Antony Blinken initially labeled the Israeli accusations as highly credible. On Friday, Reuters reported that it reviewed an 11-page UN investigation into claims that UNRWA had substantial ties with Hamas. Agency staff members have been subject to threats and coercion by the Israeli authorities while in detention and pressure to make false statements against the agency, including agency's affiliation with Hamas, and UNRWA staff members took part in the October 7th atrocities, the report says. The investigation concluded the coercion included severe physical beatings, waterboarding, and threats of harm to family members, according to the outlet. UNRWA did not provide a transcript to Reuters, and the Israeli military declined to comment. And so that is one part of this, that, you know, we are only getting a secondhand account of this report so far. It's through Reuters, and it seems to be a fairly not a very substantial version of the report from UNRWA. So we'll see what ends up coming out, what they all release here. But we do have fairly significant confirmation that other than the waterboarding, I do think this is the first allegation I've heard of waterboarding in Israeli detention since October 7th. All these other claims have been widely reported and documented. So additionally, the UNRWA report found significant abuse of all Palestinians detained in facilities. Reuters said the abuse listed in the report included beating, humiliation, threats, dog attacks, sexual violence, and the death of detained that were denied medical treatment. So basically, you know, killing prisoners just by allowing them to not giving them their heart pressure medication or something horrific like that. Multiple news outlets and humanitarian rights organizations have documented the torture of Palestinians in Israeli detention facilities. According to 972 magazine, that's a Tel Aviv-based outlet, Israeli soldiers subjected Palestinian detainees to electric shots, burned their skins with lighters, spat in their mouths, and deprived them of sleep, food, and access to the bathroom until they defecated on themselves. The Tel Aviv-based outlet continues, some testified to having been beaten all over their bodies, having cigarettes extinguished on their nets and bats. Several people are known to have died as a result of these conditions. In January, Israel announced it had compiled an intelligence dossier that found 12 members of UNRWA had participated in the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, also claiming thousands of other staffers have tied to the group. However, several media outlets were allowed to view a version of the dossier provided by Tel Aviv and reported it did not contain any evidence for the charges. Still, the White House endorsed the Israeli claims, and Washington led over a dozen Western countries in cutting around $450 million in funds to UNRWA. Tucked into the massive $95 billion supplemental military bill is a provision that prohibits aid from going to UNRWA based on the Israeli accusations against the organization. UNRWA is critical to bringing aid into Gaza and is basically coordinating all the shipments. Hundreds of thousands of the Palestinians in Gaza are basically dependent on UNRWA for survival because of what Israel has done to the Strip. As it has become increasingly clear that Tel Aviv lacks substance, an official in Norway said it is that countries that had suspended funds were having regrets. Canada, one of the 16 countries to halt UNRWA funds, announced it had reversed its decision. And on Sunday, Sweden made an announcement as well. So that's now 2 of the 16 countries. Humanitarian experts and even the Israeli military have warned that a halt to UNRWA aid would spell disaster for Gaza. This is what a senior Israeli official told the Times of Israel. If UNRWA ceases operating on the ground, this would cause a humanitarian catastrophe that would force Israel to halt its fighting against Hamas. This would not be in Israel's interest and would not be in the interest of Israel's allies either. The UN Special Rapporteur for the Right of Food posted on X. Some states decided to defund UNRWA for the alleged action of a small number of employees. This collectively punishes the 2.2 million Palestinians. Famine was imminent, now it's inevitable. Since the countries had cut funding to UNRWA, 16 premature babies have died from malnutrition-related issues, and 20 other people have starved to death. The child deaths we feared are here, said UNICEF's Mid-East chief. All right, next up here. So Biden announced in his State of the Union address that he was going to build a seaport to bring aid into Gaza. This is something we briefly talked about on the last episode of the show. So Biden mentioned it in his State of the Union, and now we start to get some details from American officials. I wrote this one for antiwar.com on March 10th. Biden Gaza seaport will take months to establish. President Joe Biden's plan to deliver aid to Gaza via the sea corridor will take at least 45 to 60 days to develop and depends on Tel Aviv's approval. Israel's 5-month siege and bombing of the Strip have caused a humanitarian catastrophe that is nearing a famine. During his State of the Union address on Thursday, Biden said he ordered the U.S. military to construct a pier off the coast of Gaza that will deliver aid by sea. Tonight, I am directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the Gaza coast that can receive large ships and carry food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters, the president said. After the address, several U.S. officials discussed the proposal in more detail. Gaza does not have an existing seaport because the Palestinian enclave is under Israeli military occupation. The New York Times reports that U.S. officials admit that building a temporary floating pier presents significant challenges and could take months to complete. The Pentagon envisions a massive 1,800-foot-long floating platform pier extending out into the sea, completely assembled without Americans stepping foot on dry land. The causeway would be attached to the shore, allowing vehicles to transport aid from ships via a 2-lane road. The first U.S. ship carrying supplies to build the pier left Virginia on Sunday. The White House says the operations will involve 1,000 U.S. troops. Biden pledged that American soldiers would not enter Gaza. It is unclear how Washington plans to secure the port and aid workers without putting soldiers on the ground. And to me, I'm terrified that this is going to end up like a Kabul 2021 situation where we have a massive number of people around, wherever the U.S. builds the pier. And maybe it's an Israeli airstrike or something else that could kill a significant number of these people and just be an absolute miserable catastrophe and something that's absolutely horrific and that the world does not want to see. So the White House's effort to deliver more aid to Gaza comes as children are starving to death after a 5-month Israeli siege and bombing campaign. Many Americans view Biden's unfettered support for Tel Aviv as making Washington culpable for Israel's many war crimes in Gaza. On Saturday, a protester disrupted Biden's campaign event in Georgia, referring to the president as Genocide Joe. And interesting that this is a white guy, not younger, but younger looking-ish. He was wearing a mask, so it was probably hard to tell what his age was until he took off the mask to do his protest and disrupt the event. But it had been, over a month since one of these disruptions had happened. And the Biden administration Biden campaign, not administration, had taken several serious steps to try to prevent any disruptions of his campaign events, including not going to college campuses, making the ticket prices for the events so expensive that nobody would pay just to protest. And, maybe this guy did, and, good for him. Aid groups and humanitarian experts have slammed the White House for attempting to deliver Gaza aid via air and sea while providing Israel the weapons it needs to prevent food, water, and medicine from entering the Strip through land crossings. On Friday, a botched aid drop crushed 5 people to death, including 2 children. Melanie Ward, the CEO of Medical Aid for Palestinians, told Al Jazeera, airdrops, temporary seaports, and the like are not realistic or long-lasting solutions to stave off looming famine and sustain life in Gaza. 5 months on, it's long past time for the U.S., UK, and others to use their substantial weight to ensure that their ally Israel immediately reopens land crossings into Gaza. Tel Aviv has deployed a multi-pronged approach to stifle aid deliveries into Gaza, a policy announced by Defense Minister Galat in October. The number of aid trucks entering Gaza each day has plummeted from 500 to under 100 over the past 5 months. Additionally, Israeli forces have attacked the limited number of shipments entering the Strip. The U.S. provides Israel with billions in military aid every year, and prevents the UN Security Council from adopting resolutions critical of Israel. However, Biden has refused to use leverage this substantial support to pressure Tel Aviv to accept more aid into Gaza. The Israeli cooperation is another factor in the success of aid shipments via sea. After Biden announced the plan, an Israeli official explained that Tel Aviv fully supports the deployment of a temporary dock, but wants full cooperation between the two parties. If Tel Aviv requires inspections of aid at Israeli ports, it could lead to the same backup scene as Gaza's land crossings. Currently, a large shipment of U.S.-funded food is sitting in an Israeli port. Tel Aviv refuses to allow the ship to be offloaded and the food transported to the starving Palestinians in Gaza. Additionally, Israel has used inspections to strip life-saving medicine from aid shipments, including antibiotics, under the pretense that it could also be used by Hamas. Some charities are working with European countries to deliver aid to Gaza by sea without the U.S. pier. The aid groups Open Arms and World Central Kitchen are attempting to carry 200 tons of food from Cyprus to Gaza. However, as of Sunday, the ship had not left the port and did not have a plan for where it was going to go or how it was going to get ashore. And you do wonder if something like this could almost cause more chaos than help. You know, if you're not able to coordinate with any groups within Gaza, if you're just trying to get the ship ashore somewhere, if it's say like beaches or something like that, and the Gazans start to, you know, mob the ship to try to get the food on, this could cause problems. So hopefully they have a real plan. Hopefully people could get food into Gaza. Of course, again, the real solution is opening the border crossings and allowing the food to flow through. All right, next up, this is another one here from Will Porter at antiwar.com. Video shows Israeli soldier executing unarmed Palestinian man. Israel's military said it had launched a probe into leaked footage which appears to show IDF troops boasting about the summary execution of an elderly man in Gaza. Tel Aviv insists the graphic video is edited and claims the unarmed Palestinians was suspected terrorist. So it wasn't just some elderly man, it was a terrorist. Obtained by Al Jazeera, the body cam video reportedly shows a November IDF raid on a refugee camp in northern Gaza, an area left in ruin after months of Israeli airstrikes. The 4-minute clip opens as an IDF unit sweeps a building in the camps with soldiers heard calling out for terrorists. When one soldier asked whether any of his fellow troops had seen a person inside, another soldier replied, "We opened a door, he fluttered, he came in my direction and did like this," proceeding to wave his arms and demonstrate and intimidating the man cries for help. So, you know, he like had his hands up and was saying, don't shoot, or something equivalent. I'm not a terrorist, please don't, whatever, please. And then the soldier added, "I killed him with 4 bullets," going on to note the man was not armed and hid beside his bed before he was shot. "You took him down, excellent," the first soldier could be here saying, and then he added, "respect." A Palestinian journalist posted the video on X that claimed to show the incident responding to questions from the Times of Israel. The Israeli military claimed the video was edited, though did not specify how. It claimed the IDF troops were under fire in the refugee camp at the time the footage was captured, and went on to note the circumstances of the incident are under investigation. When the unit re-entered the building for another sweep, the elderly man could be seen sprawled on the floor, apparently dead from his injuries. The IDF later acknowledged that he was not armed. Al Jazeera identified the man as a 73-year-old, also reporting that the victim's family demanded answers about his death and place of burial. And so this is, you know, something that I've been worried about when we talk about the death count in Gaza. You know, we're typically talking about the number put forward by the Palestinian Health Ministry, but there's been at least thousands of Palestinians that were killed by Israel, and my guess is they're not counting these dead, and I'm not even sure where they're burying them. So there's a lot of like really serious questions here about what Israel is doing with the Palestinians they kill and the dead, and if they're investigating anything. I mean, this is just another horror, you know, but I do think that's one to highlight because there is a video there, and it's just so clear what happened. Though, it's almost in a way like the Collateral murder video. Just seeing how callous the Israeli soldiers are about taking the lives of innocent Palestinians is horrific. All right, next up here. Biden says he'll never stop sending arms for Israel's self-defense. So President Joe Biden said he would not set any red lines for U.S. weapons shipments to Israel after approving 100 arms sales to Tel Aviv in the past 5 months. Israeli forces have committed a multitude of war crimes in Gaza, including some using U.S. arms. In an interview with MSNBC, Biden refused to place restrictions on Tel Aviv that what they would have to do before he stopped weapons shipments to Israel. In a somewhat convoluted statement, the president first said there would be red lines on Israel attacking Gaza, but went on to say there is no action that would lead the U.S. to cut off weapons. When asked if attacking Rafah, which is a border city sheltering 1.5 million Palestinians, was a red line, Biden replied, "It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is critical. There is no red line where I cut off all the weapons they don't have, like missile defenses, to protect them." Biden went on to say there would be consequences if another 30,000 Palestinians died, but did not explain what crossing that red line would mean. It is unclear. The unclear policy reflects the tightrope that the White House is now trying to walk, attempting to place blame on Netanyahu for the slaughter in Gaza without cutting Washington's significant support for Tel Aviv. During an interview, Biden asserted that Netanyahu is, quote, hurting Israel. According to Axios, U.S. officials say the White House is becoming increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu's ungratefulness for the American largesse. After his State of the Union address, President Biden said he would have come to Jesus meeting with the leader of the Jewish state. And I still can't believe that, if Donald Trump was president, right, and he had said that he was going to have a come to Jesus meeting with Netanyahu or Zelensky, the media would be freaking out about how this is anti-Semitic and how, maybe this is even code for wanting to erase the Jewish people or something. And Biden says it, and the media, jokes about him with it. So Biden told MSNBC that he just meant that he was going to have a serious conversation with Netanyahu sometime in the future. He explained the message would include that Israel has a right to defend itself, but must pay more attention to the loss of innocent lives. Since October 7th, Israel has killed over 21,000 women and children in the Strip, and those are the official numbers, the official Gaza Health Ministry number, not the actual death toll, which is likely significantly higher. Additionally, Israel has prevented aid from reaching Gaza, putting the Strip on the brink of famine. However, the tactic of splitting Netanyahu from Tel Aviv's treatment of the Palestinians is proving to be challenging as the onslaught in Gaza enjoys widespread support among the Israeli government. Numerous Israeli officials have been documented making genocidal statements over the past 5 months. During an interview during the MSNBC interview released on Saturday, the president explained that he had dispatched CIA Director William Burns in an attempt to reach a last-minute ceasefire before the Islamic holy month of Ramadan began on Saturday night. Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz, who visited the U.S. last week and met with Vice President Kamala Harris, has warned that unless Hamas releases all Israeli hostages by Ramadan, Tel Aviv will launch its assault on Rafah. The White House, the UN, and numerous humanitarian organizations have pleaded with Israel not to attack Rafah, as over 1.5 million Palestinians are sheltering in the city. Many of the limited number of aid trucks reaching Gaza enter through Rafah crossing. An attack on the city will likely prevent severely needed assistance from reaching the city. And Benny Gantz is, the politician that I think the White House is looking at as being the opposition to Netanyahu, but it's clear he's fully on board with the policy. Now, Netanyahu responds pretty quickly. There's an interview with Politico that I wrote up here for antiwar.com. Netanyahu will ignore Biden's red line, more forward with attack on Rafah. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hit back at President Biden after the American leader criticized the onslaught in Gaza. Netanyahu said he would order an attack on Rafah and insisted his policies are popular among Israelis. While Biden said attacking Rafah was a red line, he restated that the U.S. would never stop sending Israel weapons for self-defense. So Tel Aviv claims its military actions in Gaza are a defensive response to Hamas attack on October 7th. Netanyahu said, "We'll go there. We're not going to leave. You know, I have a red line. You know what that red line is. October 7th doesn't happen again, never happens again." And so this is the problem with the whole Israel has a right to self-defense thing, right? We talked about this a lot at the beginning of the conflict. Of course, like if a foreign adversary, like if Greece attacked Israel, Israel would have a right to self-defense. But the, claim in this statement that Israel has a right to self-defense, how it's been used over the past 5 months, a right to self-defense meant killing a cowardly elderly man at the side of, his bed, shooting 100 Palestinians as they try to get aid, starving Palestinian children to death. This is all part of Israel's right to defend itself. So when Biden says we'll always make sure Israel has the weapons it needs to defend itself, he's saying Israel will have the weapons it needs to conduct the genocide in Gaza. So in 5 months, Israel has killed at least 31,000 Palestinians. About 2/3 of those are women and children, and destroyed most of the infrastructure in the Strip. In the process, Israeli forces had displaced most of Gaza's population of 2.3 million and triggered a humanitarian catastrophe that is nearing an outright famine. While the White House has worked to pressure Tel Aviv to accept a temporary ceasefire and bring major military operations to a close, Netanyahu said the high-intensity campaign would continue for at least 4 to 6 weeks and dismissed the prospect of a pause in the fighting. Recently, the Biden administration attempted to split Netanyahu's policies from the overall sentiments of the Israeli people. During his MSNBC interview, Biden charged Netanyahu with harming Israel. Netanyahu rebuked Biden, claiming his policies were widely accepted among Israelis. "The positions that I espouse are supported by the overwhelming majority of Israelis who say to you after October 7th. I do not know exactly what the president meant," Netanyahu continued, "but if he meant that I am pursuing private policies against the wishes of the majority of Israelis and that is hurting the interests of Israel, then he is wrong on both accounts." According to recent polling in Israel, while Netanyahu isn't personally popular, his policies resonate with the public. And so this was actually written in the Atlantic Council. Israelis repeatedly show a historically low level of confidence in the prime minister, while support for his Likud party dwindles. At the same time, it's also clear that the general public supports Netanyahu's policies. About 2/3, 63% of the Jewish public, do not support Israel agreeing in principle to an independent and demilitarized Palestinian state. In an interview, Netanyahu went on, also denied that Palestinians are starving in Gaza. He said, "We don't have that kind of information. That's not the information that we have, and we monitor it closely." The Israeli leader added, "More importantly, it's not our policy. Our policies are to put as much humanitarian aid as we can." And that's just an obvious lie that I'm not even gonna bother debunking. All right, next up here, Israel plans to keep Gaza Strip split in half for a year. So Israeli officials say they would keep Gaza divided by a military highway for a year. The corridor will be buffered by a demilitarized zone and will give Israel control over Palestinians' travel in the Strip. Tel Aviv says the regional highway will make ground raids in the Strip easier. CNN confirmed the completion of the Nazaram corridor through interviews with Israeli officials and by reviewing satellite imagery. The outlet explained the east-west road, which has been under construction for weeks, now stretches from the Gaza-Israel border across the entire 4-mile wide strip, dividing the northern Gaza, including Gaza City, from the south of the enclave. Israel is destroying the structures to the north and south of the highway, leveling the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital, located some 1,200 feet from the corridor. The Israeli Defense Forces say they have used a large number of mines and explosives to demolish the surrounding area. The lieutenant colonel in charge of the destruction, that's Battalion 601 of the Combat Engineering Corps, explained that all structures in the buffer zone would be flattened. He told Channel 14 News that the remaining buildings in the area will probably disappear soon. The buffer zone will extend 1 kilometer north and south of the highway. The Israeli Minister for Diaspora Affairs said the corridor will make it easier for the Israeli Defense Forces to launch raids throughout the Strip. The official also called for the potential resettlement of Gaza by Israelis. The Net Zazarim corridor is named after a settlement that once existed in Gaza. The highway has 3 lanes and is built for heavy military equipment such as tanks. Additionally, it will allow the IDF to control the movements of Palestinians in the Strip. Over the past 5 months, the IDF has forced nearly the entire population of Gaza out of the northern half of the enclave. About 2/3 of Palestinians are packed into the southernmost border city of Rafah. While the White House has requested that Tel Aviv allow Palestinians to return to their homes in the northern half of the Strip, Israel has severely limited all travel to the area, including preventing aid convoys from reaching the hundreds of thousands of starving people living there. The creation of the corridor is part of a multi-step Israeli plan for a second highway and buffer zone that would split southern Gaza into 2 pieces, with the proposal for the Sufa corridor dividing Khan Yunis from Rafah. The IDF has not publicly adopted this portion of the proposal. The Diaspora Affairs Minister, who posted the proposal on X, said Palestinians would not be allowed to return home until all the tunnels under Gaza were destroyed. However, the buffer zones are giving Israel the ability to control the movement of Palestinians and aid transfers and provide an excuse to destroy a significant amount of the infrastructure in the Strip. As multiple high-ranking Israeli officials have explicitly called for the ethnic cleansing of the Strip, the corridor could act as cover to prevent Palestinians from returning to their homes in Gaza. The Guardian reported in December that the idea of destruction of buildings could amount to domicide, or a method of ethnic cleansing that seeks to make a region uninhabitable. All right, next up here, South Africa urges ICJ for emergency order as famine looms over Gaza. So South Africa basically did what they did last month, which was ask the ICJ to issue a second order on Israel, or emergency orders on Israel, to ask them to stop what they're doing. I imagine the court is going to do something similar to what they did last time. So in January, they found it was plausible that Israel was conducting a genocide in Gaza, and they ordered Israel to allow an aid, which they haven't done. They ordered Israel to stop attacking civilians, which they haven't done. And so the court said last month that, rather than issue a subsequent ruling, we're just going to say that Israel should apply with our initial ruling. Of course, that didn't happen. And so I had expect something similar this time. I think the court is kind of at the limit of its power. I find it's more of a, messaging tool than actually something that I think will stop the conflict. So good to keep it in the news, but I'm not sure that this particular motion is going to see any benefit for the Palestinians. All right, next up, I got a couple articles here from Jason Ditz. Israel signals readiness to launch invasion of southern Lebanon. So it's not enough that we have this war in Gaza going on, but it looks like we are on just now the brink of another one. Israeli troops carried out logistic supply drills with an eye on launching identical operations in the northern sector. The drill signals part of what officials refer to as ongoing preparations for invading Lebanon. Northern Commander Major General Ori Gordilin spoke of the determination to allow displaced civilians to return to northern Israel, declaring, "We are constantly strengthening our readiness to launch an attack on Lebanon." Israel was quick to deny media reports about March 15th being the deadline for launching a broad war in Lebanon, insisting there is no date for going to war against Lebanon, although officials continue to emphasize their readiness to do so. The international community has been scrambling to get a broader deal in place between Israel and Lebanon, and to forestall any potential war. Although these efforts continue, the reports have been that Israel put a deadline on March 15th on the deal. Talks are expected to pick up during Ramadan, which runs from March 10th to April 9th. So that just began last night with the sighting of the crescent moon. And, I do expect that to heighten tensions in subways, but it could also, be facilitate more talks. If Israel is bombing places during Ramadan, it's going to be seen as extra provocative and insulting too. Now, one more thing I just want to add on this, of course, is that I think Israel feels some desperation here because they have so many of their civilians displaced. Of course, they could end all this by ending the assault on Rafah, but they don't want to do that. And so they're willing to go to war with Lebanon in order to not have to give up the war in Gaza. And an additional piece of this is, while the U.S. is looking to prevent this, we're only looking to prevent this by pressuring Hezbollah really to agree to the Israeli demands. We're not pressuring Israel, who we actually have leverage over, to agree to any of Hezbollah demands, which could significantly de-escalate this fighting. All right, another one here from Jason Diss. Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon killed 5 family members. A family of 5, including 3 Hezbollah members, died Sunday when an Israeli airstrike destroyed their home in Lebanon. The slain included a father, mother, 2 sons, and a wife. The mother was reported by some sources to be pregnant. The family was not originally from the region, but relocated there because of a recent attack by Israel. Hezbollah confirmed 3 male family members were associated with them. In addition to the slain family in the destroyed house, airstrikes injured more than 9, including multiple teenage girls and a pregnant woman. A dozen nearby homes to the one actually targeted were also said to have been damaged. Hezbollah responded by firing dozens of rockets against northern Israel. The Israeli military said they successfully intercepted some of them, and so far there has been no reports of any injured Israelis. And then last article here, Hezbollah says strike killed Israeli soldiers on Lebanon border. So the continuing a series of tit-for-tat strikes across northern Israel. Border with Lebanon, Hezbollah reported that it has struck military sites in the border town of Metula, killing an unspecified number of Israeli soldiers and injuring others. This round of strikes was in retaliation for Israel's Thursday strike on a village in Lebanon. It was one of several Israeli strikes targeting buildings that claimed they were used by Hezbollah. In this case, the strike targeted a house, killing 1 Hezbollah member and wounding 3 civilians. Hezbollah returned fire, both targeted multiple military sites and radar sites, which they say caused direct hits and damage to the sites. So really escalating in Lebanon. The situation in Gaza, Rafah, the whole Gaza Strip is absolutely horrible right now. I thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to the show. I'll be back with more later in the week. I almost guarantee you I will have at least one extra show this week. I have just a ton of news to cover. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more.